Welcome back to our lesson when we are on the Go programming language and PostgreSQL. So in the last lesson, we wrote a handler that was named create quote. And this allowed us to get the values from the form and send those to our PostgreSQL quotations table. So what I want to do in this lesson, in this video, is to write the code for the handler function that allows us to get the quotes from the database, from the table, and display them on a web page. So since you're already familiar with how to retrieve information or data from a table using Go and Postgres, I will just go ahead and write the code. If there's need for commentary, then I will do so. Now, the first thing I decided to do was to create a struct quotation, just like we did in previous lessons. And we have the quotation ID, insertion date, author name, category, and quote. And notice insertion date is time.time, okay, which is in this package time. All right, so we have our struct. And so now what I'm going to do is to create my function handler. All right. So this function handler will be called display quotation. All right. And of course, it's a function handler, so it has to have an HTTP dot response writer. And a request object. All right, a pointer to an HTTP dot request. Now, since this handler function will be a part of our application type, I need to make it become a method, and it can only be called on an application. Okay, so that's easy enough. All right, we're gonna say app application. Okay, so now it becomes a method. All right, so the first thing I want to do, I want to create my SQL. All right, so my SQL statement. And so I'm going to call that read quote. And I'm going to use my backticks, of course. And I will say select all from the name of our table, quotations. And I will only, if there are more than 5 rows, I will only limit it to 5. So if I have 10 rows, I only want 5 to be listed. So I'm going to say limit 5. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and let's use our prepared statement, read quote. And so, of course, I know that I'm going to say app, all right, .db, .query. Okay. And so I will send in my prepared statement. And of course, we know that query returns the rows and any error that might be present. Okay. And so let's go ahead and let's check for any errors, right? Which is the responsible thing to do. In Go, you got to check for errors before you proceed. So if error is not nil, then I will simply perform status internal server error. So I will just do all of this. All right, so I'll just copy this. right? So if something happened, then we know it happened on the server side. So we will print a message, and then we will report a server-side error message to the user. Great. So assuming we get past this stage and there were no errors when reading the data from our database and our table, then I want to ensure that if anything happens, that I always release the resource, the connection that I have been holding uh, for the rows that were returned. So I'm going to say rows dot close. All right. And of course, you'll see it says it closes the rows. And so it allows everything to be cleaned up in case there are any problems. And so if there are problems, we want to make sure that the last thing that ever gets executed is this close. You always want to be careful with your resources. All right, we want to leave our database in a consistent, our reading in a consistent state. All right, so we know we're going to do this at the end. It'll always be done. And so, assuming that we passed here, there are valid rows in our rows variable. And so I need to read those rows and do something with them. So I'm going to, just like I did in the previous lesson, I'm going to create a slice of quotation, of type quotation, okay? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to iterate over the result set that is returned, which is called rows, all right? And for each row in my result set, I will create a quotation struct, okay? I'm going to call it Q. And so Q will have all these fields that we talked about. So Q will have a quotation all the way down to a quote, right? So since I have my variable Q of type quotation, which is a struct type, then all I will do is to send those placeholders to rows.scan. So I'm going to say rows.scan. And so it expects some area to store the return values. And so we're going to send the address of Q, and I want the quotation ID, okay? And then I want Q, the insertion date. Then I want Q, the author name. And then I want, what did I do here? Okay, Q dot quotation, Q dot insert, Q dot author, Q dot category, and finally Q dot the quote. All right. Probably I should move this down. Yeah, much better. All right. And so we know that this will return something, right? It will return error. And so obviously we need to check for any error. And so let's do that. So error equal, all right? And again, I keep saying this, the reason why I'm using an assignment sign is because error is a variable that was created previously, okay? And we created that variable up here, all right, up here. So after you've declared a variable, if you want to reassign it, then you use the assignment statement. Otherwise, Go will give you an error message. All right, great. So we have our error, and so let's go ahead and let's check to make sure that there was no error. And so, oops, right here, if error not nil, then I want to do the same thing that I did previously. All right, which is to simply log a message. All right, log the message and report back to the user that there was a internal server error. All right. Now, assuming that there are no errors and this is skipped, then I want to proceed with taking, okay, I know, taking the row that I got back and then appending that row to our quotation slice. Okay, so this is my slice, all right, and so I'm going to append this Q to that slice. So I want to have quotation contain all my rows. All right, so we'll simply say quotes, which is the name of our slice, all right, will be append quotes Q. All right, so quotes, which is our slice of quotation, will contain that first row. And then, of course, once we do that, then the last thing we need to do is to make sure that there are no errors that were generated. Okay, so let me close this here. Okay, all right, close that. Okay, make sure I have all my curly braces match up. Okay, so this one shouldn't be here. Okay. All right, so yes, I know I haven't used append, the quotation. Okay, so we're gonna keep doing this. And the last thing I want to do, I want to check to see if there were not any errors generated. All right, if there were errors during the process, then we want to also report that to the user. So all I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say error is assigned rows dot error. Okay, so this is something you must always do. After you've gone through everything, you still need to check the rows that error to make sure that there were no errors returned. And if there were, you need to handle them. So it's telling me error returns the error, if any, that was encountered during iteration. All right. Error may be called after an explicit or implicit clause. So this error will be generated if during this iteration where we were going through the rows, some error was produced. All right, so after we finish the iteration, we need to check to see if any errors were introduced. So again, I'm going to simply say if there were errors, we want to report that to the user as an internal server error. All right. So of course, if there were no errors, then we get to move on to line 108. And in this line, all we're going to do is to print the values, okay, that are in the quotes slice. Right? And notice that it's telling me that is never used. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use it. So I'm just going to do a simple loop. I don't care about index. I'm going to use underscore, and I'm going to create a variable called quote, and quote will contain each quote. So I'm going to use range, and range expects a slice, right? And so it's going to use quotes. It's going to grab each quote, assign it to the quote variable, and then I want to display that using f print f. Okay, it expects the writer, right, the response writer, because it will take my quote and it will display it on my behalf on a web page. Modulus v for value. After it displays the first quote, I want a new line, and it should display a quote. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. You've got f print f. You've got modulus v. Okay. All right. So f print f. All right. Okay. So I have f print f. And so let's save that. And so this is my handler function. Okay. It looks like a lot of code, but again, a lot of the things are just repeating, right? And so I will need to go to main, and I want to create a handler function. So I'm going to say mux dot handle func. Now I need to create a URL, a path that we should navigate to. Let's call it show. And so whenever we visit /show, I want to see the quotes being displayed. And I'm gonna say display. Right? I know this is already telling me I should put up in front, right? Which makes sense. All right. So up that display quotation, and remember the reason why we have to say up is because we created a type called application, and since display quotation is a method on the application type, we have to call the method on an instance of the application type, which happens to be app. All right, let's save that. Let's open a terminal. Okay, terminal, Control Shift. Okay. So Control Shift and the back quote is a shortcut for opening a terminal. Of course, you could just always go to terminal, new terminal. All right, so let me start my server. So I'm gonna say go run dot. Okay, and the reason I said we use dot is because our code is spread across multiple Go files. Okay. Okay. So let me open my browser. And I'm going to say localhost. Okay. I'm going to say /show. And notice I have all my quotes being listed. Right? We have the insertion date, we have the ID, we have the author, we have the quote. Okay, again, it's not in a template, all right? But for this video, I just wanted to show you how to do it. Of course, later on we'll see how we can put it in a template where it looks more formatted, nicer to display. All right, so that's it. You should now be able to read data from a table in Postgres and display it using Go and using a handler function. In our case, a method. And so going forward, we will look at how to display it using a template. So that's it. I'll see you in the next one. And go ahead and practice on your implementing a function handler on the example that you have been working on.